Good morning. Good morning. All right. I want to say thank you first to the Association of Metropolitan School Districts for asking the League of Women Voters Minnesota to moderate this important event. Education issues, of course, are important and central to League of Women Voters members, obviously to this group, and to Minnesotans as a whole, and we are thrilled that the candidates have chosen to participate in this forum this morning. At this point, we'd like to welcome the candidates to the stage, Senator Mark Dayton, Representative Tom Emmer, and Mr. Tom Horner. Can you step? Thanks, Mark. Morning, Tom. So that was remarkably congenial. That was wonderful.
We don't want to be sent to the principal's office.
The bios for the candidates are found in your programs. Senator Mark Dayton represents the Democratic Farm Labor Party, Representative Tom Emmer with the Republican Party, and Mr. Tom Horner with the Independence Party. The League of Women Voters was formed in 1919 and is the most trusted source of nonpartisan political information in Minnesota. We offer voter education through our printed and online voter guides to over 1.5 million Minnesotans every election year. Candidate forums and voter outreach, we conduct candidate forums and voter outreach to assist Minnesotans in making informed choices when they go to the polls. LWV Minnesota is a membership organization, and all of our work is possible through our members. Joining LWV Minnesota is an opportunity for Minnesotans who take seriously their shared responsibility for stewardship of a sound system of self-governance and to participate in Minnesota's democracy. All the candidates for today's forum have received the questions in advance. Each candidate will be given 3 minutes for an opening statement and 2 minutes for closing. The order of speaking was drawn by lot, and the closing statements will be done in reverse order. The order of speakers is randomized, as are the order of questions. The first 7 questions are allowed 2-minute answers. The last 3 questions are allowed 30-second answers. Let's begin. Opening statement order will be in this order. Senator Dayton, Mr. Horner, Representative Emmer. And we'll start with Senator Dayton.
Thank you very much, Keesha. Thank you all for this opportunity to discuss with you really the most important responsibility that you have and the next governor will have, and that is improving the quality of education for all of our children. My first job out of college, I taught in a public school in New York City, and I've always said it was the toughest job I ever had. And I learned 2 things right away. One is it takes a lot of skill and dedication to learn to become an effective teacher. And secondly, I had 32 kids in a 9th grade classroom. Most of them read well below grade level. And I don't care how good a teacher you are, I couldn't anyway reach individually 32 children in a classroom in a 40-minute period. And I assumed and believed at that time, and I think it was true, that Minnesota was a lot better than that. We didn't have a gym. The building was locked right before school. The building was locked right after school. There were no after-school activity programs of any organized kind for those students. And yet, tragically now, as I go around the state, I both see and hear from teachers and principals and administrators about the terrible overcrowding conditions in Minnesota classrooms, and I saw myself last spring in Rochester, Minnesota, a 5th grade classroom with 35 children and 1 teacher. A friend of mine teaches in Chisago 1st grade, and her class goes this year from 23 last year to 27. Another teacher, a good friend of mine in Cottage Grove, has 33 children in a 4th grade classroom and not enough desks even at this point in the beginning of the year to seat every child, and not enough space to rearrange them for other activities. So when I hear those kinds of stories and see those kinds of situations, I know that we're going in the wrong direction in terms of education. We have a funding crisis in education, as you well know. The report just the other day about how Your schools are projecting a $187 million shortfall for this year. That's even after $287 million in cuts and 1,700 layoffs of teaching and other staff positions in the last year. We're just reeling from one financial crisis to another, yet the needs of our children continue to increase. The numbers of them in school age continue to increase, and yet the resources that you and others have to meet those growing needs, to improve the quality of education, continue to be cut back, which is why my commitment, if I'm governor, is that I will increase state funding for public K-12 education every year I'm governor. No excuses, no exceptions. We have no, it's an imperative. When real, after inflation dollars, state aid per pupil has been cut by an average of $1,300 over the last 7 years, and we see the consequences that we do today. The only responsible alternative for the future of this state is to increase funding and improve the quality of education. I look forward to a chance to discuss those opportunities with you in the next hour.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Horner.
Well, thank you very much for hosting us and for showing up bright and early this morning. You know, my teaching career for the last 20-plus years have been an adjunct professor at the University of St. Thomas. I've had the easy part of education. I get to deal with adult learners who are there by choice, and even with that, I understand the challenge of how hard it is to engage even engaged students for a class period, to keep them motivated, to keep them learning. And so, first of all, let me thank you for what you're doing in the leadership positions, and all of our teachers for what they do to really move Minnesota forward. So I want to focus my comments on 3 areas that I think are important, and I hope we get a chance to talk about them more as we go through the questions this morning. The first is that we do need to deal with financing. I mean, that's the role that consumes most of you these days. I would love to be able to tell you that we're going to repay the school shift. I can't do it in my budget. I can't figure out how to do it, and still make the other investments that are important to Minnesota. And so I want to be upfront with you and honest about that. What I do have in my budget is at least the decency to say when you have to take out loans for operating cash flow, I'll at least assure that the state will pay the interest on your behalf. We're not going to borrow from you and then make you responsible for the cost of borrowing. Secondly, I think in financing, we do need to take a look at the formula. We do need to make sure that there is equity, that it makes sense, that we're using the money wisely. I think we need to make investments in areas like early childhood learning. And so in my budget, that is out on the website, horner2010.com, I've put in new money for early learning. I think that's going to help us to make sure that children are coming into kindergarten fully prepared for success, and that we can better use the money as we go forward. I think we have to take a hard look at No Child Left Behind. You know, it has done a good job of elevating issues like the disparity in teaching, the achievement gap, but now I think we need to say, has it created too much rigidity? I think we need, in a second area, to make sure that the balance between you, who are charged with the responsibility of managing the school district, and teachers is fair and equitable. I think both teachers, both Education Minnesota and the school districts ought to have a shared mutual interest in reaching a timely contract. All of the burden shouldn't fall on the school districts to reach a timely contract. That ought to be a shared responsibility. And I think we also need to sit down with Education Minnesota and provide some flexibility on critical issues like seniority, like making sure that we have the most qualified teachers teaching all of the subjects in all of the classrooms. And that's going to take a partnership. And that's what I was so happy with the editorial in the Star Tribune the other day that said, not only do I have the best vision for education, but the best ability to make it happen. So thank you very much, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you. Representative Emmer.
Thank you very much. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to stay seated because I've got a lot of, I don't know, respect for these two gentlemen. This is a very short porch on the way back here. And the fact that I made a huge mistake last night. I stayed up and actually watched that Vikings game. I'm not going to risk. I apparently don't have as much talent as the goalie on the end of the table, but I'm not going to risk falling off the back. Thank you all for having us here today. And before I get started, I want to congratulate 2 AMSD school member schools today. I want to congratulate Greenwood Elementary School in Plymouth and the Parkview Center School in Roseville. Both of these schools have been recognized with the prestigious Blue Ribbon School Award from the United States Department of Education. Congratulations to those schools and everybody who made it possible. I would like to take this opportunity right now to unveil my education budget plan for the next 4 years. Next to creating jobs in the current tough economy, our highest priority as a state must be educating our kids well. In these challenging times, I believe we must prioritize government spending for the most important public services. Our schools will be a priority because I believe our children's education is fundamental to our future success. As governor, I will protect classroom funding. My budget promise for public education is twofold. First, ensure that K-12 funding is held harmless in the next biennium. Second, we will begin to repay the $1.4 billion education shift in fiscal year 2014. We will do so faster by growing our economy and putting Minnesotans back to work, which is why we must enact our jobs creation agenda. We will improve results through broad reforms. We need to improve teacher effectiveness, kindergarten readiness, and teacher preparation programs. We will also enhance our accountability system for schools. Our plan also recognizes that the state government has put too many burdens and mandates on our school districts. We will empower local school boards to get rid of meaningless state mandates so they can focus on the task at hand, improving student achievement for all students, ensuring that we have a vibrant state economy. Thank you so much for having us here today. Look forward to a lively discussion.
Thank you. At this point, we'll go into the questioning. Again, the candidates are permitted 2 minutes for each answer. These questions will be drawn at random. They did get these questions in advance. The first question begins with Mr. Horner, and that would be question number 3. Mr. Horner, do you support granting levy authority to locally elected school boards and/or allowing school boards to renew an existing operating referendum by a majority of the school board to help stabilize education funding?
If I got the order of the questions right, no and yes. I don't support at this time granting school boards the right to initiate levy without referenda. I think that one of the concerns I have, and certainly willing to hear and eager to hear your perspective on it, one of the concerns I have is that by doing so, do we change school boards from managing education policy, managing what happens in the classrooms, to now being another forum in which we fight over tax policy in Minnesota, and we fight over no new taxes versus more taxes. I don't think that's an appropriate role for the school boards. I do think, however, that school boards ought to have the authority, with some limitations, ought to have the authority to renew levies that have been approved by referenda so that you can have predictability, you can have stability in your funding.
Thank you. Representative Emmer? Do you need? Certainly. 2 minutes.
Look at that, we can share. Does that work?
Okay, I'll repeat the question. Do you
No, I don't think it does.
do you support granting levy authority to locally elected school boards and/or allowing school boards to renew an existing operating referendum by majority vote of the school board to help stabilize education funding?
No, I don't. I actually believe that the taxpayer should have the absolute right to vote on levy referendums. I would not take away that right from the voters.
Thank you. Senator Dayton.
I would support allowing school districts to extend a previously approved referendum for operating purposes, but I believe that any new referendum should require voter approval. And I think the fact that we're even discussing this question shows how drastically the financial security for our school districts has deteriorated. I don't believe there should be the need for operating referenda for school funding. The Minnesota Supreme Court ruled over 40 years ago that relying on the property tax to fund K-12 public education was unconstitutional because it's inherently unequal. And the legislature and Governor Ventura were ostensibly made the arrangements back in the beginning of this decade to obviate that necessity. But the funding has not been forthcoming, so I believe there are about 125 school districts, almost one-third of the school districts in the state, are going to need to go to the voters this fall for an operating deficit. Those deficits have been forced on you by, as I said earlier, the cuts in real dollars in state funding per pupil, and also by the governor using the school districts as a funding source to manage the state's affairs, as we just saw 2 days ago when he said, once again, he's going to withhold another $141 million from 135 school districts. So the school districts that are able to manage their affairs and keep a relatively modest cash balance are going to have to sacrifice that because the state's not managing its affairs responsibly, which is why, again, we have to increase, and I will increase state funding for public K-12 education every year I'm governor. That's the principal purpose of our state government. It's about almost half the state budget, 48% for K-12 and higher education. If you put in early childhood, it's about 49%. So half the state's responsibility financially is to the school districts, and they're mismanaging that responsibility.
Thank you. We'll go to question number 2. This starts with Representative Emmer. There has been a great deal of discussion in recent years about enhancing the early learning opportunities to close the readiness gap. What specific strategies and investment will you support in the area of early childhood education to ensure all children enter kindergarten prepared to learn?
I absolutely support options for parents, choices for parents in the early education area. Ages 3 and 4, we should allow parents choices, whether they're public choices or private choices, to get kids ready to read, give them some literacy standards to enter our K-12 system. But then we have to make sure that we do not lose the gains that we make from the early childhood investment. We have to make sure that we support our K-12 system. And that's going to require reforms, not only in the way we deliver those services, but also in the way we fund those services. And as I listened this morning, it occurs to me we would all love to just keep saying money is the answer. More money. Let's throw more money at the problem. We're going to put more money every year into education. If money was the only answer, then we'd be sitting here today saying the public school system in Washington, D.C. is the best school system in the country. It is not. Money is not the only answer. It's also how we deliver, how we measure our progress, how we set our goals. In this case, in order to solve the roller coaster funding issues, and by the way, some of you may have heard from TV ads that I voted to cut education. I have never, in my 6 years in the legislature, voted to cut the formula, the funding formula, per pupil funding formula. That's just not true. Again, we're going to protect that K-12 funding, but we have to look at how we deliver the service. We have to understand that, yes, we must make investment in early childhood learning opportunities, but we also must not lose any gains we achieve at that level in our K-12 system. And the only way you're going to support it, I respectfully submit to Senator Dayton, is if you start generating new jobs again in the state of Minnesota, because new jobs generate more revenue, which in turn will pay what we expect from our schools.
Thank you. Senator Dayton.
Well, Representative, we've learned that less money is not the answer, so maybe we ought to try the alternative. And we all agree on the importance of jobs, and we all agree that job creation is essential for managing these budget crises and avoiding them. And we also know that high-quality education is the prerequisite for successful employees, for successful entrepreneurs, and all the other people whose skills our society depends upon. I think it's a terrible mistake to look at Minnesota public education through the prism of Washington, D.C., and with all due respect to Secretary Duncan, through the prism of Chicago. Your school operations are far better, and your administration is far better, and the quality of our teachers is far better, and the commitment, a bipartisan commitment, that Minnesotans have made in the past to quality public education has been the experts from Art Rolnick at the Federal Reserve and the state economist demographer will say the foundation of our success, the past is the foundation of our success in the future. So when we're talking about what we need to do in terms of money, I mean, let's get real. In real dollars, after inflation, per pupil student aid from the state of Minnesota has been cut by $1,300 over the last 7 years. And you see the consequences of that. To say that somehow you're mismanaging your financial affairs and therefore not spending money wisely and putting every dollar as effectively as possible, I think is a serious disrespect to the efforts you make and the efforts that teachers make to stretch every one of those dollars further, and school boards, elected by the people, responsible to the people. And I think it's time we get honest with ourselves and honest with the voters of Minnesota. The public education's problems today are first and foremost financial. Can we reform them? Yes. Must we reform them? Absolutely yes. Can we make public education better? Yes, and we will. But we're not going to do it by cutting and cutting and cutting and forcing more borrowing and putting you in precarious financial situations when you don't know from one year to the next how much money you're going to have to operate. And then when you think you do, that money's taken away from you. It's wrong. And we've got to change it. And it's the first responsibility of the next governor of Minnesota.
Thank you. Mr. Horner.
Well, let me just suggest to my two friends here that the only alternative to less money is not more money. There is another alternative. It's innovation. And I'm glad Senator Dayton mentioned Art Rolnick, who for the last 25 years has been Senior Vice President of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve, because he took a look at all of the budgets, the details that the three of us have put out, including what we've proposed for education funding and everything else. And he came to the conclusion that the plan that I've submitted is the best. It best delivers the promise of Minnesota. And I think in early childhood learning, we do need to do a couple of things. Excuse me. My wife and I benefited greatly from ECFE, Early Childhood Family Education. We need to make sure that we're keeping that investment strong. It was a great opportunity for us as new parents to learn more about the skills of parenting. When you look at my budget, I do have new money in there for early learning. And I think we need to work with organizations like the Minnesota Early Learning Foundation to make sure that money is spent wisely. I've had the opportunity through some of my community service on Serve Minnesota, the AmeriCorps board in Minnesota, to help create Minnesota Reading Corps, a great public-private organization that works with volunteers to bring them into the schools to make sure kids have the opportunity to read at grade level by third grade. It isn't always just about government. There are different ways to do it. I think we need to make sure that we're using all of our dollars wisely. So let's look at the new money I'm proposing for early learning and make sure that we coordinate it with some of the child care, the sliding scale child care. A lot of that money serves the same population. Let's get together and figure out where we can leverage $1 to get better value and serve this important population and make them ready for schools. I think it's these kinds of things that we need to be thoughtful about, where we're making an investment not just based on how many dollars we're spending or how many dollars we're not spending. The investment is based on what is the outcome we want to achieve. And the outcome we need to achieve are kids graduating from 12th grade with the skills they need to succeed in life. And when you back up from there, you better make sure they're reading at grade level by third grade and they're coming into kindergarten fully prepared for success, and that we have parents who understand parenting skills.
Thank you. Next question is question number 6. This goes first to Senator Dayton. Many Minnesotans are concerned that education policy has become overly partisan. One suggested solution is reestablishing a state board of education with the authority to appoint the commissioner of education and to oversee a state educational research center, which would provide nonpartisan, evidence-based research to state policymakers. What is your view on this idea?
Well, I still come from the era of government back in the 70s when there were commissioners that were appointed by boards, and the governor was ultimately held properly responsible for those actions of the commissioners, and I think that would be a mistake. I think the governor is elected to be the chief executive officer of the state, is properly held accountable, and that accountability requires the ability of the governor to select commissioners and to make the decisions whether they continue or not. I think a board of education in an advisory role to the commissioner has merit, although I'd point out that if you look at the diversity of public education in the state in terms of all the different stakeholders, the geographical differences of the districts and the like, that pick a board that's truly representative of administrators and principals and teachers and students and parents and all the others who have a stake in this hugely important enterprise. Is going to be enormously challenging, and yet still have it be not be so large as to be unwieldy. I think the research center, again, I have to look at the cost factor, but if there's research that is not being performed then I think that has some merit. But I think there's a lot, as we've cited former Representative Myron Ornfield's study in another question. At the Humphrey Institute, there's a lot of research going on. There's a lot of research available nationally about education, and I don't know that there's a need to duplicate or replicate something that's already being done. But the accountability, as I say, rests with the governor, and I should also say with the legislature. You know, it shouldn't be partisan, and it should reflect as I say, the great diversity of Minnesota and the different school districts and the different issues, and those are real, and dollars are part of that discussion, that debate, and properly so. So to have the legislature involved over the 5 months of the session, shorter one following, and looking at these and working with all of you and all the other stakeholders is the process. Hopefully it produces the best consensus possible about how we can most effectively use what will always be limited resources to best serve the needs of all of our children.
Thank you. Mr. Horner.
No, I don't think we need another level of oversight and bureaucracy. Look, I don't think Minnesota suffers from a lack of talent, a lack of great ideas, a lack of innovation, a lack of smart people. I mean, just look at this room, in spite of the three of us being up here. You know, there's a lot of talent already in Minnesota. We know what the solutions are. We need the political will, the leadership to get things done. And one of the things I believe we need to do is to stop looking at education in all of these discrete silos. We better start thinking as a state of education as a seamless cradle-to-grave process. And how do we make sure children, young adults have an opportunity to participate with the education system at a level that is appropriate to their skills, to their needs? And how are we achieving an educated population that is going to help Minnesota succeed? And so we need to look at each level and figure out what's the right outcome that we have to make sure that Minnesota has. I mean, look at the opportunity next year when we, for probably the only time in my lifetime, will have a new president of the university, a new chancellor of MnSCU, and a new governor. We better use that to have a statewide conversation on what do we want out of higher education. And part of that conversation is how do we want to make sure that our great two-year schools, the VOTECs and the community colleges, are fully integrated with our communities and fully integrated with our high schools, so that we have that seamless process, so that we're thinking wisely about education at every step, and that it's a seamless process, that it's not these discrete silos, because we can't afford it. It's not just that we can't afford it financially, we can't afford it as a state if we're going to compete in the global marketplace, if we're going to have citizens who understand their role in the civic community.
Thank you. Representative Emmer.
I do not support reestablishment of the Board of Education. But I also don't necessarily agree that it's time for a statewide conversation. We've already had the statewide conversation. We know what the problem is. It is time for action. We have waited too long. It's time to get things moving. The State Board of Education was eliminated in 1998 because it was too bureaucratic and because it was creating rules, more rules that were overly burdensome on our school districts. We don't need another level of government creating more mandates for our school districts. We need to allow our school districts and our wonderful school board members to do their job. I do not believe another layer of government is going to solve that problem. We've got higher ed institutions already in this state that are more than capable of doing any nonpartisan research that is necessary, and we should be utilizing them to do just that.
Thank you. The next question is number 4. This goes first to Mr. Horner. Minnesota was unable to compete for a federal Race to the Top grant because the legislature and Governor Pawlenty could not reach agreement on a package of reforms such as creating an alternative pathway for teacher licensure, reforming the tenure system, and enhancing teacher and principal evaluations. What will you do to provide leadership in this area?
Well, thank you, and it's a great question, and I'm going to reframe it a bit because I don't believe that the problem fundamentally was they just couldn't agree on a package of reforms. I think the problem was the relationship has been so poisoned by politics that they couldn't even come to the table and look each other in the eye to decide what the problem was. That's what we need to get past. We need to create an entirely new attitude in Minnesota about education, about our responsibility to work with all parties that are involved in education, and to respect them, but also to hold everybody accountable. Again, on the back table there, I left copies of the editorial that the Star Tribune wrote, where they looked at and talked to the three of us about our education perspective. And what they concluded, and what others have concluded, is that in this kind of an environment, where people are focused on who's right instead of what's right, that I offer the best opportunity to bring all parties to the table, to hold them accountable, to find innovative solutions. Being the centrist isn't just taking a little bit from here and a little bit from there. Being the centrist is to say a lot of here and a lot of there isn't working. We need to think entirely differently. We need new solutions. And the great opportunity in Minnesota is that under the 2009 law, we have everything in law to create the kind of school education system we need in Minnesota. It is now up to us, all of us, those of you in the room, those of us up here, and those who aren't in the room, including Education Minnesota, to figure out how we use those opportunities to create a school system, an education system that is producing the kinds of educated students that Minnesota needs to succeed.
Thank you, Representative Emmer.
Well, thank you. You know, I look at it a little different. I think leadership is about setting a vision based on what you think should be the right direction for the state of Minnesota. In this case, we're talking about our educational system. If everybody's in charge, if everybody's ideas are the only ideas, then there is no leadership, and you'll never find a direction where you can all get together and move. The interesting thing, and I might surprise you from my perspective, is that I think President Obama and Secretary Duncan have actually put together some very good reforms. I'm very disappointed that it's the federal government that is moving these reforms as opposed to the state of Minnesota. But I will say that despite differences that I might have in policy that the Obama administration has put forward, I don't have differences on some of the reforms that they put forward when it comes to accountability, performance measures, et cetera, in our schools. That being said, in the last legislative session, it was the union boss for Education Minnesota, literally, that stopped any reform from happening in the state of Minnesota. That cannot happen. We must have the political courage, the will to make sure that we represent the kids. That's what this has to be about. We know what the problem is. Let's step up and move reforms. It's not about the next election. It's about what's right for our kids. And if I'm governor of this state, I will represent our kids as opposed to special interest groups.
Thank you, Senator Dayton.
Well, it's not, the question is not exactly accurate. Minnesota did apply for Race to the Top funding, and they paid $500,000, the State Department of Education, to a consultant prepare the contract, which they should have prepared themselves. The proposal, I'm sorry. The proposal itself was judged by the reviewers to be seriously deficient in important respects that related to the quality of the proposal, the application, and it has some 1,200 pages of appendices. It was terribly done. It was poorly representative of what Minnesota does offer and could have in the area of reform. Just the role reversal here with Representative Emmer surprised you to know that I'm not such a great fan of Secretary Duncan's approach, and I actually agree with Representative John Klein that rather than dangling out money and at this point still having only 2 states qualify for seriously needed money, the federal government should have done what I tried 7 times in 6 years as a U.S. Senator to do, is fully fund the broken promise of the federal government to provide for 40% of the costs of special education, which would have, if it had been met, provide $250 million a year to Minnesota school districts to fulfill the mandates that have already been placed upon you, and I think that relates to another question. But yes, we do, if there are up to, under the present formula, $175 million of federal money over 2 years available for Minnesota public education, then if I'm governor, I will work cooperatively with you and with the teachers organization and with everyone else who's involved, and with a professional State Department of Education that's not a political operation, that represents everybody's interests. I think we can pull together, showing what we have done here in Minnesota and what we can do in the future in areas of further improvement, a competitive application, and that would be my goal.
Thank you. The next question is question number 5, going first to Representative Emmer. There has been a great deal of discussion at the local and state level about Minnesota's desegregation rule and integration revenue program. If you are elected governor, what steps will you take to ensure integrated and equitable learning environments for all students?
Well, first off, I want to address, before we go to the integration formula and the desegregation rule, this idea of race to the top. Senator, it's not exactly correct when you suggest and you merge these things. I'm sure Congressman Klein will be happy to hear that you agree with him about money not being used to dangle in front of the states. But the reason that the race to the top application was not acceptable was because Minnesota was unwilling, again, because of the union boss, was unwilling to enact reforms in this state that included performance measurements, accountability standards, and alternative teacher licensure issues, things like that. That's why, and it didn't make sense to reapply when the legislature did not make those changes. We need to make those changes in order to access those dangled dollars that you don't like. When it comes to the desegregation rule and the integration funds, they're supposed to attack the achievement gap. I think we all know they are not working. This is not working. We need to redirect those funds to the kids in terms of preparing them with their reading skills, their literacy skills, instead of hiring diversity coordinators and the like. We need to make sure that those dollars are literally going to the kids in need. We need to hire teachers that can give them the additional help that they need to make sure that they can succeed in the classroom. Let's make sure those dollars go to the purpose for which they're intended. And right now, I would submit they're not.
Thank you.
In every case.
Thank you. Senator Dayton?
Well, one of the earlier questions referred to sort of an unnecessary interjection of partisanship into education policy, and Representative Emmer, it shouldn't surprise Representative Klein that we agree on important areas, and as we did when we worked cooperatively together when I was a senator to get the first congressional funding for Beyond the Yellow Ribbon, which is a pioneering program of the Minnesota National Guard to assist our returning heroes from Iraq and Afghanistan and their families. And I think we do need to forge those kind of bipartisan consensuses when we can achieve them. And that's a key part of what we would need to do in going back again to race to the top and these other areas of education policy reform. You know, Rudy Perpich had a sign on his wall that I'll put back if I'm governor, said, "None of us are as smart as all of us." And it is that the synthesis of all the different ideas and perspectives that, when it is accomplished successfully, means we will have a stronger and more competitive proposal. And we'll have better education policies for our children all over this state. In terms of desegregation, I would in this case agree, and he hasn't answered yet, but Mr. Horner talks about the need to find results, identify what results we want, what outcomes we want, and then assess the current policies in light of that. You're far more expert about the intricacies of desegregation and the challenges than I am. And I would use the next legislative session as a process with you and with your representatives and others who are concerned about this to face the realities of the demographics of our metropolitan area and other outlying parts of the state where we have integration challenges. The fact that families move or mobile, and how do the schools then address that, especially in an era of limited resources. And we do need to, I think, take education funding and look at it in a more comprehensive and holistic way, and look at some of these categorizations of funding that are directed toward important objectives. But in an era where the basic foundation funding is going to be reduced, it really undermines and jeopardizes the ability to use these areas of the funding for specific targeted areas such as integration, which the studies have shown is crucial to learning opportunities effectively.
Thank you. Mr. Horner?
It's interesting how sometimes we spend a lot of time on old questions when we don't want to talk about difficult new questions. And integration is one of those difficult new questions that we do have to address, and we have to address it candidly and forthrightly. And there are challenges. We cannot be a state that is bound by only mathematical ratios and formulas. This is not an issue just for the inner cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. Talk to some of the first-ring suburbs, the superintendents there, as I have, and you'll see that the problem also is tied into open enrollment. And how do we manage those issues? Go up to Pelican Rapids, as I have, and see that every morning of every school day, 4 buses converge on one corner to take students out of that district, sometimes affecting their ratios, their balance. We need to deal with all of these issues. And so a couple of things that I believe we need to do. One is that we do need to make sure that the formula for integration is responsible, that it really deals with those areas that have challenges, and that we look at how the money is spent. Secondly, I think we need to make sure, again, that we do have an investment in early childhood learning, that all children are coming into school fully prepared for success. Thirdly, that we're providing the resources in school to make sure that kids are reading by 3rd grade, that they are successful. Fourth, I think we need to start thinking about how do we make sure that we allow teachers to teach, that they're charged with making those students in front of them as successful as possible, not according to a federal standard or a generic state standard, but according to the needs of the 25 or 30 kids in front of them. And lastly, we do need to ask some tough questions about open enrollment. I favor that kind of competition, that kind of system, but it has to be done in a way that is responsible to the real challenges that all of you deal with every day.
Thank you. The next question goes first to Senator Dayton. In 1997, Minnesota's per pupil education spending was 8% above the national average. By 2007, Minnesota's per pupil standing had dropped to 1.3% below the national average. What will you do to restore Minnesota's historic commitment to education?
Well, the question provides another documentation of what I've been saying consistently throughout this campaign, which is that the state funding for education has been declining, and the result have been both cutbacks in real dollars that you have available with which to operate, as well as higher property taxes, and that burden put on Minnesota taxpayers. So again, I go back to what I said before. You know, that with almost half of the state budget going to education, about 40% for K-12, about 8% for higher education, and a little less than 1% presently for early childhood education, which needs to be increased. If we're talking about raising revenues in this state, as I am, this is the principal purpose. This is why we're talking about raising revenues, is so we can increase our investment in public education. And I think you understand better than any politician can the real world challenges that you face every day in those schools. And I, over the course of the last decade, have been in a couple hundred Minnesota schools and a couple thousand Minnesota classrooms. And I've seen firsthand those challenges. You know, when you go to an elementary school in Rochester of 300 children and there's 17 different languages and dialects spoke there. The high school, Rochester Mayo, the principal told me there are 54 different languages and dialects in a school with 1,800 students. Minneapolis and St. Paul school districts have reportedly about 70 different languages and dialects. When you have children coming in different grades from all over the world, all over the country with different learning backgrounds, some with no previous learning experience at all, then you know that the challenges that you face and those teachers in those schools and other support staff are ever more complex and ever more difficult. And we need to succeed. And the future of the state depends upon successful education of all those children from all those different backgrounds coming in at all different times. And that does mean a commitment of financial resources. And those who think you can do it with less money should be the first one to go in and take over a school and be responsible, public school, and be responsible for actually proving that that's possible and maintaining the quality of standards that we have.
Thank you. Representative Emmer.
We do face very challenging times, but I look at this as a time of opportunity, a great opportunity. In the next few years, we must reevaluate how we deliver all public services, and that includes our K-12 education system. If I'm governor, we will not raise taxes. And we talk about increasing revenues, but that word is taxes. Increased tax collections may be the goal, but not by raising taxes in this state. State taxes, increased state taxes, will drag down our economy even further. We will not have stability in government services and government budgets until we get our economy back on track. And you are not going to get our economy on track by raising taxes in either of the fashions that my colleagues have offered. In order to get the economy back on track, you have to create jobs. And in order to create jobs, you have to create an environment with lower taxes and less regulation that allows our job creators to start to create those jobs again. Once you start driving jobs, you will increase revenues to the state of Minnesota. That's how you solve your budget problem, not constantly by going back to the hardworking men and women of this state and telling them more. Yes, we must invest in our education system because you can redesign government all you want to make it efficient. You can create the best business environment in the world, but if you don't have that next generation to drive that economic engine, we've all lost. So what have we committed to? We will hold K-12 funding harmless in the next biennium, and we will repay that the education shift. And by the way, the faster we get jobs moving again in this state, the faster we can not only repay that shift, but we can protect our K-12 system. And I got to say it one more time. It cannot be about just throwing more dollars at the problem. It's got to be about what are your goals, how do you measure those goals. It's got to be about the performance of our students, not the amount of money that we're putting in.
Thank you. Mr. Horner.
Well, I don't believe that state priority and open checkbook are synonymous terms. I think we do have to be fiscally prudent. I think we do have to be smart, and no one knows that better than the folks in this room. And the reality is we have a $6 billion shortfall next year that we have to solve. We have to fix it. That's the constitutional priority of the next governor. And I think we're going to get there when we stop asking how much and start asking what for. What is it that we want to achieve? What's the outcome that we really need to accomplish to make sure we have well-educated Minnesotans at every level prepared for success? And so I think there are 5 areas that we can look at. Excuse me. The first, as I've said, and as I have new money in my budget, is early learning. We need to make that investment in early learning. I mean, every study, Wilder, University of Michigan, has shown that an appropriate investment in early learning can save up to $1 billion for school systems, for education in a state like Minnesota, because it helps reduce the costs later on. So we need to make that investment. Secondly, something no one has talked about here today is we need an investment in our healthcare system. We cannot have kids coming to school unhealthy, unprepared to learn. That is an education issue, and we need to make that investment as a state. Third, we do need to keep driving efficiency. I mean, you folks are doing a great job. The intermediate school districts, some of the districts in smaller communities around the state, talking to their cities, their counties. How can they have a single HR department, a single purchasing department to drive greater efficiency, to get more value out of every dollar? Fourth, I'm committed to take a look at every mandate the state has imposed without funds. And I think in 3 years, we ought to sunset every unfunded mandate to force us to look at it to see what's important. And we can start that on day 1 of the new governor's office. And last, we need innovation. And so also in my budget, I've put in new money for innovation to create the kinds of opportunities that you folks need.
This next set, these last 4 questions have been given 30 seconds to answer. This first question goes to Representative Horner. I'm sorry, Mr. Horner. In recent years, legislation has been proposed that would create mandatory statewide health insurance pool for all school district employees. Do you support this proposed new mandate?
No, I don't support it because I believe that you people are smart enough to figure out what's the best health care coverage for employees in your district. That's what we pay you the big bucks to do. We're going to trust you to do it.
Is this on? I think it should be voluntary, not mandatory. I think if the state can pass legislation that permits school districts to pool for bargaining purposes, as businesses do, some of the largest corporations in the state pool for bargaining purposes, get better coverage, more comprehensive at lower cost. That would mean lower cost to the taxpayers, better coverage for you and your employees. But again, it needs to be voluntary, not mandatory.
Thank you. Representative Emmer.
No, I have not supported it in the legislature, and I would not support it as governor. I think that it will lead to a worse problem in terms of escalating costs, and I think there are better ways to address the cost of health care insurance in the state of Minnesota.
This question goes first to Representative Emmer. Again, 30 seconds. The state and federal governments fall significantly short of funding special education mandates. In the coming year, Minnesota school districts will be forced to spend over $500 million of funds meant for regular classroom instruction on mandated special education programs. Will you support fully funding the state's special education formula?
Actually, I think we need to reform the state's special education funding. We need to look at it. The funding for special education is escalating much too fast, and the way you have to work with it is not. It doesn't work. I would favor, and I hope everybody knows what I'm talking about. I'd favor Iowa's model, where the money actually follows the student. I think that we don't do you a service by having you try to guess what you're going to get back from the state with the limited funds. I'd like to reform the way we do special education funding.
Thank you. Mr. Horner.
Well, I absolutely agree. I mean, I think that is one of those areas that calls out for reform, that we have to sit down as a state and figure out what makes the most sense. Not just what the formula is, but how do we make sure that the students who are being served well.
Thank you. Senator Dayton.
Some of these words like reform get thrown out like slogans, not strategies. And the reality is that the money, again, is from the federal government, has not been forthcoming as promised. It was it increased slightly under President Bush, to his credit, and then declined in the last couple of years, unfortunately. And I acknowledge that it was in I was unable to get, as I say, 7 times in 6 years I tried, and I couldn't get a majority of the Senate to support fully funding. They said it was too expensive. It would have been about 2/3 of the cost of 1 month in Iraq. So it reflects the failed priority of the federal government, and we need to, and my time's up, we need to address the funding deficiency there.
This next question goes first to Senator Dayton. Minnesota is one of the only states in the nation to prohibit school districts from starting the school year prior to Labor Day. Will you support repealing this law so locally elected school boards can determine a school start date that best meets the needs of their community?
I'm kind of like the Texas politicians say, well, half my friends are for it and half my friends are against it, and I always stick with my friends. We'll thrash it out in the next legislative session. I've seen this one repeated over and over, and there's now a waiver system. I'll talk with all of you and others and see what in the different conflict and different priorities, sometimes conflicting priorities of different areas of the state geographically in terms of the economies there and the lifestyle preferences there, families and all what we can do together.
Mr. Horner.
You know, again, this is not one of those either-or kinds of propositions, even though it gets set up this way. We can sit down and figure this out. It is important to the tourism industry to have a post-Labor Day start, and I think we ought to be respectful of that. But I think we all agree that we need more educational time. So let's look at innovative solutions. Some of those might include bringing the teachers back even earlier to do some of their in-training, maybe even their statewide convention before school starts, so that we can use the days between September and June for educational time.
Thank you. Representative Emmer.
I think first off, the important thing to recognize is that we have to listen. If you're in the governor's office, we've got to listen to you. But I'll tell you, as a legislator, I voted for the law back when I first got into the legislature. After that, I was convinced by one of my local board members, school board members, that that's not appropriate. So I voted to repeal it the last time. But you know what? In traveling around the state and campaigning for this office, I have to tell you, the tourism industry is extremely important, and in these challenging economic times, we need to do what we can to protect those jobs. So where I'm at right now is I would vote to support it.
Thank you. The last question goes first to Mr. Horner. Again, 30 seconds. Do you support vouchers or expanded taxpayer subsidies for non-public schools?
You know, I think we have everything we need in the current law, in the 2009 law, to do what is necessary to create the kinds of innovative, competitive schools within the districts that need to be done. We ought to take advantage of what already is there and use that wisely to create the kinds of new opportunities for students, teachers, and school districts to make sure we are providing the best education for students.
Thank you. Representative Emmer.
You know, I don't like the term vouchers because it's taken on a negative connotation over the past several years. All we're talking about is empowering parents to get their kids the best education they can. I strongly support giving parents choices and ensuring the kind of healthy competition that choice offers.
Thank you. Senator Dayton.
Not public money for vouchers, no.
Thank you. Okay, at this point we're ready for closing statements, which will go in reverse order of the opening statements. Each candidate has 2 minutes. We'll start with Representative Emmer.
Thank you all for having us here today. Really appreciate it, even though it's 7:30 in the morning and I'm still struggling after watching that pathetic game last night. You know, I just sat there and I kept thinking maybe at 14-9, this will be the drive that changes the game. This one will. Well, it didn't. So here I am this morning and I'm paying for it. Thank you for your patience with me, and thank you for the beginning, I hope, of a dialogue that we can have over the next several years. There is no issue that is more critical to the vitality of this country and our state than reforming and improving our education system. That is why business and foundation leaders, elected officials of both parties, and parents have come together and are working to dramatically improve our education system. All of you have an extremely tough job and are on the front lines of ensuring that our children receive a high-quality education in the state of Minnesota. As members of AMSD, you have been leaders of reform through performance pay for teachers and improving student performance in math and science. You have my gratitude. As you know, for many years, Minnesota enjoyed the status of being the best in the nation when it came to education. Today, our education system is no longer considered the best in the nation. And in fact, our student performance in reading has remained largely stagnant. Other states and countries are outperforming us. We've made significant gains in math, but not in reading. We continue to have a persistent achievement gap. We need to set the bar high, measure results, report those results to the public, and reward success and achievement. We, if we're in the governor's office, will set an aggressive agenda and fund it as outlined at the beginning of this forum. We will continue to have a jobless recovery and economic stagnation until we improve our education system and promote the innovation necessary for the 21st century. And I will add, this will be a priority if we are in the governor's office. As Jackie and I, some of you know, we actually have kids in our public schools. This is incredibly important to not only their future, the future of the state, but to their future. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you. Mr. Horner.
Well, I also want to thank you, but not just for being here this morning, but for all that you do to make education so terrific in Minnesota. I mean, we can't overlook the fact that we still have great schools, great teachers, great administrators, great school board members, and we ought to be appreciative of that. Over the course of the campaign, I've reached out to a number of the superintendents, and I've learned a lot, and that's my style. I want to keep learning because I think that's the only way a governor governs effectively. You know, Libby and I have had 3 kids in public schools, and they had great education, terrific education. They went right into college, and they were able to bypass some of their generals, a great opportunity. But look, I'd be the first to acknowledge that they had a great education because they were in a school district that had the resources to provide good schools. They had terrific leadership, some of whom are in this room today, and they had engaged parents. We need to make sure that every family has that opportunity. Every child has that opportunity throughout the state of Minnesota. And that's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take innovation. And fundamentally, that's the issue in this campaign. It is not just about taking the status quo and cutting it down to the bone and saying, there, that's better, or taking the status quo and raising taxes so that it's a lot bigger. It is saying the status quo for a lot of Minnesotans isn't working. We need new thinking, we need new approaches, we need new answers, we need new leadership. And so I would ask you, if you want bold leadership in the governor's office, it starts with bold leadership among you, the voters. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with you.
Thank you. Senator Dayton.
I want to thank you for the incredibly important work that you do. And I'm guessing that, you know, some of this morning has been a revelation to you that you probably didn't realize that people have been throwing money at you during the last several years, or that we're approaching you with open checkbooks for you to do whatever you dream up in the moment, or that you need money for innovation. I think I understand from my own real-world experience and from visiting more schools all over the state than anybody else running for this office, the realities of what you face in those schools, the challenges, and what you and others have done incredibly well and professionally to do more with less, to address all these different needs that come to you and where society asks you to be the remedy. And we can improve public education, and we will. But we're not going to do it by cutting more money from public education. We're not going to do it by blaming you for the problems that are not your creation. We're not going to do it by telling you that you don't have the expertise to use already, given the resources and the abilities to do so, to improve public education. And I believe you do. And I believe it's the responsibility of the state of Minnesota and the federal government to provide adequate funding to fulfill the Supreme Court requirement of 40 years ago and make that funding equitable all over this state. And then, yes, reduce the mandates and get out of your way and let you and other dedicated professionals do your jobs well. We have 61 different tests right now imposed on our students. Streamline that. Reduce it by more than half. Get to what's important. Do diagnostic testing beginning of the year that's related to individual student improvement. Make those commitments, and we'll see better education as a result.
At this time, we'd like, on behalf of AMSD, to thank the candidates for joining us today on this very important forum on these very important education issues. Thank you very much, and everyone have a wonderful day.